The stars stretched endlessly outside the viewing glass, tiny sparks scattered across a sea of darkness. To most people, the sight of deep space was lonely, frightening even. But to Captain Adrian Vey, it was the only place that truly felt like home. He had spent more than half his life moving from ship to ship, from colony to colony, always reaching further, always looking for something new. Humanity was young among the stars, yet determined. They were explorers, settlers, and survivors. Adrian's ship, the Starlance, was a medium-class exploration vessel, sturdy and fast, with a crew of 80. Their mission was simple: survey the unexplored sectors beyond the Terran colonies, map resources, and identify habitable worlds. It was supposed to be routine, but Adrian had learned long ago that routine in deep space rarely stayed that way. On the 6th month of their voyage, sensors picked up something strange. At first it looked like debris, maybe the remains of a battle, but as the ship drew closer, the object revealed itself as massive, too large to be wreckage, too intact to be only drifting scrap. Lieutenant Kara, his sensor officer, leaned forward over her console. "Captain, you'll want to see this." Adrian stood beside her and studied the readings. The ship in front of them was enormous, shaped like a crescent and covered in a surface that seemed to shimmer like living metal. It gave off faint energy signatures, old but steady, as though it were asleep rather than dead. "That's no design I've ever seen," Kara whispered. "Nor anyone in the fleet," Adrian replied. His voice was calm, but inside curiosity surged like fire. Humanity had discovered ruins before. Abandoned stations, broken machines, whispers of civilizations long gone. But this ship felt different. It was not ruin, it was waiting. He gave the order. "Bring us into orbit. Send a drone to scan for hazards." The crew worked quickly. The drone zipped forward and relayed images of dark halls, shattered corridors, and large chambers lined with strange organic-like structures. There were no life signs, but faint oxygen pockets existed in some sections, enough to suggest the ship once held a living crew. Adrian stared at the hollow interior on the display. He felt a pull, an instinct as though the ship wanted to be found. Against the cautious protest of his first officer, Commander Hayes, Adrian ordered a boarding team prepared. "Sir," Hayes argued, "this could be dangerous. We don't know if it carries pathogens, traps, or automated defenses." "I know," Adrian said firmly. "But humanity has always learned by stepping into the unknown. If we leave without trying, we may never get this chance again." Within an hour, Adrian and a small team suited up and crossed the void in a shuttle. They entered through a massive breach in the alien hull, one side torn as though from an ancient explosion. Their boots clanged against the strange metallic floor, echoing into the hollow emptiness. The corridors were dim, lit only by faint pulses of blue light running like veins along the walls. The air was thin but breathable through their filters. Every surface looked grown rather than built, as if the ship was part machine, part organism. Lieutenant Kara murmured, "It feels alive." Adrian nodded. "Stay alert," they advanced deeper. Rooms stretched out like great hives, filled with pods and consoles that seemed fused into the walls. Whatever this species had been, they hadn't used the same cold mechanical designs as humans. Their technology breathed with a strange elegance. Then came the sound. It was faint, like a whisper carried through pipes, but it made the team freeze. Adrian raised his hand, signaling silence. The sound grew louder, a faint groan like someone in pain. "Life sign," Kara said suddenly, staring at her scanner. "Weak, but definitely there. Ahead 200 meters. The crew exchanged stunned looks. To find a survivor on a derelict this old was almost impossible. Yet Adrian felt no hesitation. "Let's move." They followed the signal into a chamber larger than any before. In its center lay a shattered throne-like seat, and slumped against it was a figure. It was not human. The being's body was tall and lithe, armored in what looked like broken plates of silver and black. Her skin, yes, her gleamed faintly, pale like starlight. Her hair was long, tangled, and silver blue, flowing like threads of liquid metal. She gripped a broken weapon in one hand, though her strength seemed drained. When Adrian and his team stepped closer, her eyes snapped open. They glowed faint gold, sharp and burning with defiance. With surprising speed, she raised the weapon, though it barely powered on. Adrian halted and raised his hand slowly, showing no hostility. "We are not your enemies," he said gently. "We found your ship adrift. We want to help." The alien's breathing was heavy, her voice rough when she spoke. "Human?" The word dripped with bitterness, but also with weakness. "Why, help me?" Adrian knelt slightly, trying to meet her gaze without threatening. "Because you're alive, and that's reason enough." For a moment she seemed ready to fight, but then her body shook and the weapon fell from her grasp. She slumped forward, unconscious. "Captain," Kara said urgently. "She won't survive much longer without medical attention." Adrian hesitated. This was the decision point. His orders were clear: recover alien tech, not aliens themselves. Bringing her aboard could put his crew at risk. She could be hostile, dangerous, even a spy. Yet something inside him refused to leave her here. He finally said, "Bring her carefully, we'll save her." Back aboard the Starlance, the alien was placed in the medical bay. The ship's AI assisted the doctors in stabilizing her. Her biology was strange but not incomprehensible. She breathed oxygen. Her blood carried iron and her cells responded to treatment. Slowly her wounds healed, though she remained unconscious. For 3 days she lay in silence, and the crew whispered their fears. Some called her a threat, others a miracle. Commander Hayes confronted Adrian privately. "Sir, you know the risk. She could be a soldier from a hostile empire. The fleet will demand answers when they learn we're harboring her." Adrian's reply was steady. "Then I'll answer them. I couldn't let her die. Not when she was right there in front of us." On the 4th day she woke. Her eyes fluttered open and she stared at the sterile walls around her. Adrian was present, waiting patiently. He greeted her with a calm smile. "You're safe. You're aboard a human ship now." The alien studied him in silence before speaking. "I am Lyra, commander of the Valari Dominion." Her tone carried pride but also exhaustion. Adrian introduced himself, explaining their mission. Lyra listened, though her expression was hard. "You should have left me." "The Valari do not surrender," Adrian replied softly. "Then consider this not surrender but survival." Something flickered in her golden eyes, a mix of confusion and resistance. For her, depending on another, especially a human, was the greatest humiliation. Yet without his choice, she would have been dead. Days passed. Lyra remained under watch, her injuries healing. She rarely spoke, but Adrian visited often, bringing reports, sharing small pieces of human culture. He wanted her to see that his people were not conquerors, but explorers. One evening, Lyra finally asked, "Why risk your ship for me? What do you hope to gain?" Adrian shook his head. "Not everything is about gain. Sometimes it's simply the right thing to do." She stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of his words. Her people had fought wars for centuries, always seeking power. The idea that a commander would risk himself for no reward seemed alien. It was in that moment, the moment she allowed herself to listen, to not resist, that she made her first surrender. It was not of body, nor of will, but of pride. She let down her guard just a little, and allowed the possibility that this human was not her enemy. For Adrian, it was a spark that would burn far brighter than he imagined. He didn't know why yet, but saving her had already begun to change him. The encounter was only the beginning. The Starlance glided silently through space, its engines humming like a steady heartbeat. Life aboard the ship had returned to routine, at least on the surface. The crew worked shifts, mapped sectors, and ran surveys. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. It wasn't the unknown stars that made the crew uneasy. It was the alien resting in their medical bay. Lyra, the Valari commander, was recovering quickly. Her wounds had closed, her strength had returned, and her golden eyes burned with the fierce pride of her people. She was not chained, but the security team always kept watch nearby. Most of the crew whispered about her in the mess hall, unsure whether to see her as a guest, a prisoner, or a threat. Captain Adrian Vey carried the weight of their doubts on his shoulders. He knew he had broken protocol by saving her. Fleet Command would demand explanations. But every time he looked at Lyra, he knew he had made the right choice. The first true test of trust came when Lyra asked to leave the medical bay. "I am no fragile creature," she said one morning, her voice steady though her steps were still weak. "I will not lie in a bed while you all stare at me like an animal." Adrian considered her request carefully. Some of his officers wanted her confined, fearing she might sabotage the ship, but Adrian believed isolation would only feed her hostility. He finally gave permission, under supervision. So Lyra walked the halls of the Starlets. Everywhere she went, silence followed. Crew members paused, staring. Some avoided her completely. Her presence was a reminder that this was no ordinary mission. Lyra carried herself with dignity, even though she could feel the fear in their eyes. To her, humans were strange. They were weaker than Valari in body, yet they moved with determination. They were young as a species, yet they built ships to cross the stars. And Adrian confused her most of all. One evening, Adrian found her standing before the large viewing glass in the observation deck. Stars glittered across the void, endless and silent. She did not turn as he entered. "You call yourselves explorers," she said quietly, "but you do not understand what waits out there." Adrian stepped beside her. "Then tell me." Lyra's eyes reflected the starlight. "The Valari once ruled these stars. Our fleet stretched across hundreds of systems. But pride led us into a war we could not win. The Draxith came, creatures without mercy. They destroyed us system by system. Now we are scattered, broken, hiding in the shadows." Adrian listened in silence. He could feel the weight in her words. For the first time, he saw not only a proud warrior, but a survivor, carrying the ashes of her people. "I should hate you," she continued. "Humans thrive while we fall, but—" She hesitated, her voice lowering. "You saved me when you had no reason. That I cannot ignore." Adrian turned to face her. "We don't see survival as weakness. We see it as strength. Maybe that's what makes us different." Lyra met his eyes, and for the first time she did not look away. Something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of trust. The alliance between them began slowly. At first, Lyra spoke little, answering Adrian's questions about her people with cold precision. But as days turned into weeks, she opened more. She described Valari technology, organic starships grown over decades, weapons that fed on stellar energy, and fleets commanded not by many but by few chosen warriors. In return, Adrian shared humanity's story. He spoke of Earth, of its wars and peace, of how humanity had struggled against its own chaos to finally reach the stars. Unlike the Valari, humans had not conquered through power but through persistence. They failed often, but they always rose again. Lyra listened, sometimes with disbelief, sometimes with wonder. For her, surrender had always meant shame. But humans spoke of surrender differently, not to enemies, but to necessity, to cooperation, to survival. It challenged everything she had been taught. Not all aboard the Starlets welcomed this growing bond. Commander Hayes confronted Adrian one night in his quarters. "Captain, this has gone too far. You treat her like an ally, but we know nothing about her true intentions. What if she's feeding us lies? What if she's leading us into a trap?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "I've seen her eyes, Hayes. She's lost everything. That's not the gaze of someone plotting conquest. That's the gaze of someone who's endured too much." Hayes shook his head. "I hope you're right, because if you're wrong, the entire crew will pay for it." The choice came sooner than anyone expected. 2 weeks after Lyra's awakening, the Starlets intercepted a signal. At first it seemed like static, but then the AI translated it. A transmission in a harsh, guttural language. Lyra froze when she heard it. "The Draxith," she whispered. The crew fell silent. Lyra explained, her tone sharp and urgent. "They are hunters. If they've sent a signal, it means they are close. If they find your colonies, they will not stop until everything burns." Panic rippled through the crew. The Draxith were a nightmare from old star records. Rumors of a species that left nothing but ruin behind. Adrian clenched his fists. Humanity had barely begun to settle new systems. They weren't ready for war against such a force. Lyra turned to him, her voice steady but her pride lowering once again. "You cannot fight them alone. But with my knowledge, with Valari technology, you may stand a chance." Adrian searched her eyes. He saw no deception, only resolve. This was her second surrender, not of pride, but of secrecy. She was offering him the one thing she had left, the legacy of her people. He nodded. "Then we fight together." The next days became a storm of preparation. Lyra shared designs stored within her memory, teaching the engineers how to adapt Valari energy cells to human weapons. She showed them weaknesses in Draxith attack patterns, strategies that once saved her people from annihilation, even if only for a time. The crew watched her carefully. At first suspicious, they slowly began to respect her. She worked tirelessly, her once distant pride now tempered by determination. Even Hayes, though cautious, admitted she was giving them an edge they never had. One night, as the ship floated in the quiet between stars, Adrian visited the observation deck again. Lyra was there, as always, staring into the endless dark. "You've changed since we found you," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "I was a commander who lost everything. Pride was all I had left. But pride does not rebuild a people, perhaps. Trust does." Adrian smiled faintly. "And you trust me now?" Lyra's golden eyes softened, though her voice held its usual strength. "Enough to fight beside you. That is no small thing." For Adrian, her words struck deep. Her first surrender had been survival. The second surrender, her choice to stand with him, was far greater. And though he did not admit it, he was becoming addicted to her presence, to the strength and vulnerability she carried at once. Then came the order from Fleet Command. A transmission arrived, demanding that Adrian return to human space immediately with the alien in custody. Fleet intelligence wanted to interrogate her, fearing she might be a threat disguised as an ally. The crew was divided. Some agreed it was safer to obey. Others argued they would lose everything Lyra had shared. The debate nearly split the ship. Adrian stood before them all in the command deck, his voice firm. "We will not hand her over. She is not a prisoner. She is an ally. If Fleet Command wants answers, they'll have them, but on our terms, not theirs." The room fell silent. Even those who doubted him felt the conviction in his words. When Lyra heard of his decision, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "You risk your career, even your life, for me. Why?" Adrian met her gaze without hesitation. "Because you trusted me when you didn't have to. I won't betray that." For Lyra, it was a shock deeper than any wound. In her world, loyalty was earned only through power and fear. But here was a man who offered it freely, without demand. It broke down another wall inside her. She realized her pride was no longer chains, it was dissolving into something new. She surrendered again, not in defeat but in choice. She chose to believe in him, but fate gave them little time to dwell on trust. The next morning, alarms blared. The Starlets had intercepted a fleet on long-range scans. Draxith warships, 6 of them, cutting across the sector toward human space. Adrian stared at the display, his chest heavy. The enemy was real, and they were closer than anyone imagined. Lyra stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "Then we strike first, together." And so, their alliance was sealed not in words, but in war. The atmosphere inside the Starlets shifted from quiet exploration to tense preparation. The Draxith fleet moved like predators across the star charts, their ships enormous and dark, built for one purpose: destruction. 6 of them advancing toward human space. For the crew of the Starlets, it was a nightmare come alive. For Lyra, it was a familiar shadow returning to finish what it had started. Adrian stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the holographic display of enemy ships. He felt the unease of his crew, saw the fear in their faces, yet he knew fear alone would not save them. Humanity had never faced the Draxith directly, but if they allowed panic to rule, the colonies would fall before the fight even began. Lyra stepped forward, her presence commanding. Even though she wore no armor now, her bearing was still that of a warrior. 6 warships, she said coldly. Each one could destroy a human colony by itself. You cannot outrun them forever. If you retreat, they will follow until nothing is left. Then what's the alternative? Hayes asked sharply. We can't fight them head on. Our weapons won't scratch their hulls. Lyra's eyes burned with determination. There is a way. But it requires both of us, your people and mine, to trust each other completely. Adrian turned toward her. What are you thinking? She spoke slowly, as if weighing each word. There is a Volari warship hidden in this sector. An ancient vessel from the final days of our empire. It was built with technology far beyond what humans possess. It may be the only thing powerful enough to face the Draxith. The crew exchanged stunned glances. An ancient Volari warship, if it existed, could turn the tide of battle. But it could also be a trap. Hayes voiced the thought on everyone's mind. How do we know this isn't a trick? You lead us to this so-called warship, and maybe it's nothing but a graveyard. Or worse, a Draxith beacon. Lyra's golden eyes flashed with anger, but she held back her pride. Because if I wished you dead, Captain, I would not be standing here. I would have let the Draxith find you themselves. Adrian studied her. He could sense the weight in her voice, the bitterness of memory, the faint tremor of hope she tried to hide. He nodded. "We'll find this ship." The journey took 3 days. Guided by Lyra's directions, the Starlents navigated through a field of dead moons orbiting a dim, dying star. At first there was nothing, only rocks and silence. But then, nestled in the shadow of the largest moon, the sensors picked it up, a massive structure half buried in ice and stone. The sight silenced the bridge. The Volari warship was unlike anything Adrian had seen. Its hull was sleek and curved, like the blade of a crescent glowing faintly with dormant power. Even after centuries, it radiated majesty. "There," Lyra whispered. For the first time, her voice trembled. "The alien, the last of our great ships. I thought it lost." Adrian gave the order to approach. The shuttle carried him, Lyra, and a small team to the ship's surface. As they stepped onto its frozen hull, Adrian felt a strange vibration under his boots, as if the ship was aware of their presence. The entrance opened at Lyra's touch, organic metal shifting like living tissue. They entered vast, silent corridors. Symbols glowed faintly on the walls, responding to her presence. At last they reached the command chamber. A massive throne-like seat stood at the center, surrounded by panels and veins of light. Lyra approached it slowly, her expression torn between reverence and sorrow. "The alien will not respond to me," she admitted softly. "Only one who is deemed worthy by its core may command it." Adrian frowned. "Worthy? By what measure?" She turned to him, eyes steady. "The ship was built to choose leaders not by blood but by spirit. It will test whoever seeks its command." Adrian stepped forward without hesitation. He placed his hand on the glowing panel before the throne. At once, light surged through the chamber, blinding and brilliant. The ship came alive with a deep hum, light spreading like fire through its veins. Adrian felt something reach into him, not physically, but into his mind, his very being. Images flashed before him. Battles fought, choices made, sacrifices endured. The ship was searching him, judging him. He felt it weigh his courage, his compassion, his stubborn will to survive. Then silence. The lights pulsed once, strong and steady. The throne glowed brighter, and the ship's systems awakened fully. Lyra gasped. "It has chosen you." Adrian opened his eyes, breath heavy. "Then let's put it to use." Bringing the alien to life was not easy. Its systems were vast and complex, far beyond human understanding. But with Lyra's guidance and Adrian's instinctive bond with the ship, progress came quickly. The Starlance docked alongside, its crew transferring supplies and data. Soon the Volari warship began to move, breaking free of the moon's icy grip. The crew of the Starlance watched in awe as the alien stretched its wings across the void. Humanity had never seen such power under their control. Yet with that power came pressure. Adrian knew the Draxith fleet was drawing closer every hour. They had to be ready. Lyra stood beside him on the command deck of the alien. She no longer looked like a defeated survivor. Here in this ship she seemed whole again, a commander reborn. But her pride was no longer the same cold armor. It was tempered, softened by the trust she had given him. "Do you understand what this means?" she asked quietly. "A human now commands what no Volari could. You embody what my people lost, courage without arrogance. Perhaps this is why I lived, why I met you." Adrian met her gaze. "Then let's make it count." The Draxith fleet arrived 3 days later. 6 warships emerged from hyperspace, their hulls black and jagged like blades of bone. Their engines glowed with crimson fire and their weapons hummed with deadly power. The sight alone was enough to freeze hearts, but not Adrian's, not Lyra's. The alien soared forward, flanked by the smaller Starlance. Adrian sat in the command throne, feeling the ship respond like an extension of his body. Lyra stood at his side, guiding him with her knowledge, her voice steady even as the storm approached. "Focus on their flanks," she instructed. "Draxith ships are strong in their cores but weak at the edges. Strike fast, retreat, and strike again." Adrian nodded. His hands moved over the controls, though it felt more like instinct than action. The alien answered with blazing beams of energy, tearing across the void. The first clash shook the stars. The alien's weapons struck one Draxith ship, cutting through its shields. The enemy returned fire, crimson blasts slamming into the alien's hull. The impact rattled the ship, but its organic structure absorbed the blow, flexing rather than breaking. Adrian gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay calm. Around him, the crew worked tirelessly, combining human resourcefulness with Valari systems. For the first time, humanity stood face to face with the Draxith and did not fall. Lyra's voice rang out, "Now strike their rear engines." Adrian directed the alien into a sharp maneuver. The ship spun gracefully, energy beams slicing across the enemy's rear. One Draxith warship exploded in a fireball, scattering debris into the void. The bridge erupted in cheers. Hope ignited, but the battle was far from over. 5 warships remained, and they closed in with fury. For hours, the fight raged. The alien struck again and again, while the Starlent supported with precision fire. The enemy's sheer numbers pressed hard, but Adrian and Lyra moved as one. He commanded with courage. She guided with wisdom. Their bond was tested with every strike, every close escape. At one point, a Draxith ship nearly rammed them, its weapons glowing for a killing blow. Adrian hesitated for a split second, but Lyra placed her hand on his arm. "Trust me." He met her gaze, saw the fire in her eyes, and obeyed. He ordered the alien to dive directly into the attack. At the last second, Lyra triggered an ancient maneuver, energy flares bursting from the ship's wings, blinding the Draxith sensors. The enemy ship missed, crashing into its own ally and erupting into flames. Adrian laughed in disbelief. "That was insane," Lyra smirked faintly. Sometimes insanity is survival. At last, the tide turned. With only 2 warships remaining, the Draxith began to retreat. They had expected easy prey, but instead they faced a force reborn. Adrian pushed the alien forward, delivering one final strike. A beam of pure energy cut through the void, splitting another Draxith ship apart. The last one fled into hyperspace, vanishing into the stars. Silence filled the command chamber. Then cheers erupted across both ships. Against all odds, they had survived. Humanity had faced the Draxith for the first time and won. Adrian sank back into the throne, exhaustion heavy in his bones. Lyra stood beside him, her expression unreadable. At last she spoke softly. "You have done what my people could not. You faced them and you endured. This is why the alien chose you." Adrian looked at her. Her eyes were no longer filled with only pride or sorrow. There was something else now. Something deeper, unspoken but powerful. Her first surrender had been survival. Her second had been trust. This, he realized, was her third surrender, hope. She had given up despair and chosen to believe in him completely. For Adrian, it was a feeling stronger than victory. He didn't just want her trust, he needed it. It had become his deepest addiction. But as the celebration spread across the ship, a new shadow loomed. Lyra's gaze drifted toward the stars, her expression darkening. "They will come again," she whispered, "and next time they will not come alone." Adrian followed her gaze, knowing the war was far from over. The battle was won, but the true storm had only begun. The battle was over, but the stars still carried scars of fire. Broken pieces of enemy ships floated in silence, drifting like dead leaves across the void. For hours, rescue shuttles and repair drones moved between the survivors, pulling people back from the edge of death. Adrian stood at the command deck of the Valari warship. The great vessel had accepted him as its commander during the last desperate battle, and now it obeyed his voice with quiet loyalty. He felt humbled, almost small inside its vast halls of glowing walls and living metal. Lyra stood beside him. Her once perfect armor was scratched and burned, yet she carried herself with pride. There was no longer bitterness in her eyes when she looked at Adrian. Instead, there was something different, something that could not be named in a single word. It was trust. It was peace. It was the end of her long struggle against herself. A fragile peace humanity celebrated across the colonies. The Draxith had been pushed back, their invasion broken. For the first time in history, humans and Valari stood together. Survivors from Lyra's people had begun to appear, answering signals that had been silent for centuries. The Valari remnants were scattered, wounded and broken. Yet when they saw Lyra alive and standing with a human captain, they felt a spark of hope they thought was lost. But peace was fragile. The human council was cautious. Many leaders whispered in private meetings, "Can we trust the Valari? Will they betray us as they once betrayed the galaxy?" Adrian knew these doubts well. He faced them each time he walked into the council chamber. Still, he refused to let fear guide the future. One day, as he stood with Lyra on the viewing deck, she asked quietly, "Why do your people not claim victory for themselves?" Without you, they would have been destroyed. Why share it with us? Adrian gave a small smile. Because victory means nothing if it doesn't build something better. If we only fight for ourselves, we'll always be alone. But if we fight for each other, maybe the galaxy will finally change. Lyra listened. Her people had never thought this way. To the Valari, strength had always meant dominance. Yet this human spoke of strength as something else, a bond, a bridge. His words cut through years of pride more deeply than any blade. Lyra's confession that night. When the stars hung silent and the warship drifted like a guardian over the recovering fleet, Lyra sought Adrian again. She found him in the command chamber speaking softly to the ship itself. The living vessel pulsed with faint light as if answering his voice. To Lyra, it was a strange sight. The warship had never accepted even the greatest Valari lords without question. Yet here it was, bowing to a human without hesitation. Adrian turned when he noticed her. "You couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. "No," she admitted. For a long moment she stood in silence. Then, as if gathering courage for a final battle, she spoke. "Do you remember the first time we met? I was broken and I let you help me. It was my first surrender. I thought it was weakness. I hated it." Adrian nodded but said nothing. Lyra's voice grew softer. "But it was not weakness. It was freedom. When I trusted you, I stopped fighting alone, and now I cannot stop. It has become part of me. Your presence, your way of standing against the dark, your refusal to let go. It has become my deepest addiction." The words carried the weight of her entire life. For a Valari warrior, pride was armor, and surrender was death. Yet here she was, stripping that armor away. Adrian stepped closer, his eyes steady. "Lyra," he said, "your trust isn't a chain. It's a choice. And it means more to me than any victory." The warship hummed around them as if sealing their exchange with silent approval. A new alliance. Over the following months, humans and Valari remnants began to meet. At first there was tension. Soldiers watched each other with suspicion. Leaders argued. But slowly, through shared rebuilding efforts, bonds formed. Valari engineers repaired human ships. Human medics healed Valari survivors. Step by step, walls of fear were lowered. Adrian and Lyra became symbols of this fragile alliance. Wherever they walked, whispers followed. The captain who tamed a Valari warship. The Valari commander who chose a human over her pride. Yet Adrian did not see himself as a symbol. He was just a man who had chosen to help someone in need, and the galaxy had changed because of it. During a gathering of both peoples, Adrian stood before them and said, "The galaxy remembers only wars and ruins. Let us give it something new to remember. Not fear, not conquest, but unity." The hall was silent for a heartbeat, then filled with applause, not just from humans, but from Valari voices too, shadows beyond the stars. But the galaxy was vast, and victory against the Draxith was not the end. From the edges of known space came whispers of watchers, an older empire, silent for millennia, now stirring again. They had seen what had happened. A human commanding a Valari warship, a Valari commander surrendering her pride to trust. To them, it was not just unusual, it was dangerous. In the cold chambers of a distant world, unseen figures spoke. This union will not last, and if it does, it will break the balance we have kept. Stars shifted and ancient ships began to wake from their slumber. The legacy of Tubak on the warship, Lyra and Adrian stood side by side once more. The galaxy's future was uncertain, but neither looked away. Lyra said quietly, "My people once believed strength was only in power. But now I see strength in something else, in surrender freely given, and in trust that cannot be broken." Adrian nodded. "Then maybe we're ready for what comes next." The two of them looked out at the stars, no longer as enemies, no longer as strangers, but as partners bound by choice. Their bond was not written in conquest, but in surrender and trust. And though the galaxy would face storms again, one truth had already changed it forever. Her first surrender had become his deepest addiction.